What's up guys, this is All Day Any Day 1 on the PS4 and I'm going to be giving you this video on what stats to primarily focus on. So, not skills, let's go ahead and look at your stats. So there's two different ways you can look at your stats. When you go into your inventory, you can either press L3 or you can go to buffs and it'll be on the right side. But the thing is, with the attributes, it gets all messed up. The numbers get switched. So you're probably better off just looking at your stats through your inventory. So for the stats, the important stats to really focus on your defensive stats are your average health and the damage reduction. You don't necessarily have to focus too much on anything else, although there are characters that do get their bonus from dodge and deflect. Those are also two really good defensive stats as well, because dodge what dodge does is it negates all damage, but the percentage is so low. It's probably the lowest out of all of them. Deflect, it negates half of the damage and sends half that damage back to the sender, so back to the enemy that hit you or whatever. So projectiles, melee, whatever, but the percentage is also pretty low, but it's not as low as dodge rating. So with dodge, you can, I have or had about 12 or 13,000 dodge rating on Spider-Man, but he wasn't dodging like too often. He was dodging maybe like one in every 15 hits, which is fine, but I mean, it wasn't like as much as you'd expect it to be. With defense rating, you definitely want to get that one up the most, probably out of the three, because with defense rating, it reduces how much damage you take overall. So the higher your defense is, the higher your damage reduction gets, as well as your gear having damage reduction on them as well. So the higher your damage reduction, the better. So you generally want to hit about 40% damage reduction, or 35 to 40% or higher. Well, with a character like Psylocke, someone who with I guess good artifacts and whatnot and has a shield in their gear that procs, you don't necessarily need to worry about having too much damage reduction. Plus, the character like Psylocke, she can summon her projections and they take the damage, and she can also dodge and turn invisible a lot. So that's why I don't worry about that. With average effective health, each character varies. So a character like Hulk will, you probably want to be around 50,000, 45 to 50,000 at the minimum. I have a friend who can reach about 90, almost 100,000 health. Um, I mean, I've seen people with almost 100, like 100,000 health and not be able to pass cosmic trials. So they won't die, but it's just the damage output. Um, but yeah, you want to generally be around 45 to 50,000 or higher. You know, the higher, the more survivability you have. For the tenacity, I'm not 100% sure on what that is. Some people were saying it was like magic damage reduction. Some people were saying like elemental, like status effects and stuff. And yeah, for your offensive stats, the four main stats you want to focus on: crit hit, brutal strike, crit damage, brutal damage, and base damage. Those are the main stats you want to focus on. After that, then you can focus on attack speed, because attack speed, I mean, I'm not going to say it's not good, because attack speed is always good to have, but it won't help you put out as much damage as you'd like to, especially if you're a cooldown character, a character that uses cooldowns. Then attack speed might not help you at all, really. Attack speed will help characters like Daredevil, so it helps you build up more of your combo. But yeah, so if you have a character that has 100% brutal strike, like For example, let's just talk about Daredevil because he can get his combo finisher about every 5 seconds, probably less, if depending on how high your attack speed is. Um, so with him, you don't want to really focus on putting any points in crit hit or brutal strike chance rating. You want to focus on putting points into crit damage and brutal damage and your base damage. So for base damage as well, the only way you can increase base damage is from your two main attributes. And the way you look at your two main attributes is when you go to your skills, go to traits, and then you'll see the two, it'll say fighting or intelligence, strength and whatever, speed and whatever, energy and whatever. You know, it'll say two of those attributes, and it'll say 4% per. So for a character like Daredevil, or even Blade, if you're not focused on anything else except for your signature, you would want to stack as much brutal strike and crit damage as possible. So a legendary item like the ultimate nullifier would definitely be the go-to for both of those characters. The reason why you want to increase your critical damage is because the higher your crit damage is, the higher the brutal damage will basically do as well. So it's like you want to have high crit for any character that isn't relying on a automatic a brutal strike, whatever. For any character, including like Psylocke, you want to make sure you have high crit hit rating, because crit hit rating compared to your brutal strike rating is basically like having, oh man, it's pretty it's pretty confusing on how to explain it. So crit hit rating is your crit, correct? So that's just gonna be your crits against your normal attacks, and then brutal strike rating is another crit, but that's a crit towards your crits. So then your critical hits end up becoming the normal hit compared to the brutal strike rating. So you have normal hits, and then you get critical hits, and then brutal strikes are the critical of the criticals. So the higher your percentages for your critical hit, the more often you're able to actually hit regular crits, the more often you'll be able to hit brutal strikes. So another thing to keep in mind is you want to make sure you still do have a higher percentage with brutal strike rating, mainly because it's not higher. You don't want it to be higher than your critical strike rating, obviously, so you can hit more. But it would be good to have a pretty good balance between them. Like mine right here is 3087 and 2986. That's pretty well balanced. And then if you can see my crit damage rating, it's still pretty high, but nowhere near as high as the brutal damage rating, mainly because the brutal damage rating will still, the higher that is, the more damage output you put with it. So you want to have a high crit damage rating, but there's no say to how high. I want to say you want to have, for your brutal damage rating, about 1.5 times more than your crit. Either that or 2 times more. Really depends though, because if you don't want to be at 2000 crit damage rating and 4000 brutal strike, a good spot would be 3000 and 3000. Yeah, so with this though, when you have already a high crit damage like 5.5k, then 10.7k brutal damage is completely fine to have, especially since it's an extremely high number right there already. The base damage, you want to generally look at having, at the very minimum, 60% base damage, at the very minimum. This is for every character too. Base damage is for every character. Doesn't matter whether you can do auto crits or auto brutal strikes or whatever. The higher your base damage, the more damage output you'll put out. So like on a character like Kitty Pryde that I have, my crit, brutal and all that is extremely low, but I have 152 or 154% base damage, and I mean I was able to pass Cosmic with her without having to do too much crits, mainly because all of her regular hits were hitting really high. So you want to have high base damage or at least 60% base damage at the very minimum. 80% is where you want to generally look at with having for like a good spot. 100% obviously is a good one because that means you're doing double the damage that you originally were doing. And yeah, so the physical damage rating, energy damage rating, mental damage rating, melee, ranged, summon. Those are good ones to have as well. So for like something like my melee base damage and melee damage rating, you want to, those are the two you want to focus on more, the melee and the ranged versus the physical, energy, mental, because those are already get a 2400 buff to it. So you want to try to increase the melee or ranged or summon damage depending on like how your character is built around. So having higher melee damage is going to be perfect for melee build users. Higher range is going to be perfect for the ranged characters. Higher summon is going to be perfect for the higher summon characters. If you mix and match it or whatever, you try to get as much melee, ranged, and summon, it won't be high. It'll be about like 500 each. Just a fair warning. So what helps with those your stats would be your infinity points. So the thing about the infinity points though is
keep those thoughts to yourself,
what I did
please.
is I put my points into crit damage and brutal strike. I took them out from their main attributes, so I would be sitting around like almost 100% base damage, but when after testing it for a few hours, I just found myself doing more damage anyways with more 10% more crit damage and 14% more 13% more brutal strike. Yeah, so you won't see a number change on the stats though, which is unfortunate. With these percentages you won't see a number change, but I mean you can definitely see the difference. For characters like Daredevil and Blade, any character that can do auto or relies on their auto brutal strikes, you definitely want to increase your brutal strike probably the most, just because I mean the higher your brutal strike percentage, the more damage it does. The critical damage is nice, but the thing about that infinity point
Dinner tonight?
is it's 0.1% or 0.2% each point for the critical one. So you either need a lot of points, infinity points, or you just don't choose that and go to the brutal strike. So shoot, oh yeah, another way to increase your stats. So as you can see, like in my utility slot, you can only get a modification in your utility. It can't be in anything else, otherwise I would be getting it. Well, you can get it in your weapon as well. I just haven't done that for my weapon yet. You can get extra stats in your utility and artifacts as well. So where you go for that is right over here. I probably should have stayed over there first. So you're gonna go to the science division lady, and then there's all these artifact mods. So the artifact mod that most of the artifact mods have brutal damage rating and damage reductions. So if you're a ranged character, ranged damage rating or marksman modification will be perfect for you for ranged damage rating and brutal strike rating. If you are where is it, the summon one right here, and if you're a summoner, officer modification would be great for you, summon ally damage and brutal strike rating. And then if you're a melee character, vanguard modification would be great for you because you do melee damage rating and brutal strike rating. So the amount you'll get from that is 300 for whatever of the three you choose, and then 200 for the brutal strike. And then for the utility slot, there's all these different types. You have Agamotto's that gives you magic powers, spirit, health, and whatnot. And then Bursting Gene Therapy, Centurion, Auto Target. The one that... So, I'll let you know which ones I would suggest using if you're trying to increase most of your stats. So, Density Manipulator is a great one to have because, well, you do higher crit hit and brutal strike, you get more health, higher damage rating, and damage reduction from AoEs. Um, what else is there? No, not air schemes. Killgrave Pheromones is good for some characters. It's just not all the characters will really rely on psychic powers. Only character that really relies on that is Jean Grey if you're using a psychic build, and Psylocke. But you don't want to use this for Psylocke because you're not really relying on summoned allied damage, and there's just other ones that are better than this. Repulsor, I used Repulsor Afterburner for Hulk, for the crit hit rating, movement speed, power cost reduction is not bad. Damage rating to movement powers and leap powers. Those are the two I used it for. Stabilized Extremist is what you want to probably go for in general if you're trying to increase all four of the stats. So energy powers, the only one I know that can actually really benefit from it is Nova and Iceman with the Shatter. But anyways, every character can really use the crit hit, brutal strike, brutal damage, and crit damage. So that's from the Stabilized Extremist. The only way you can use this is, well, you need to have 5 enhanced genomes, 5 biological samples, 10 mechanical components, 1 unstable molecule, and 1 modification installation kit. Where you get the modification installation kit is from this guy, and it's right here, 100 legendary marks. So yeah, that's basically all you need to know on how to upgrade your gear and what to be looking for in your gear. If you're a melee build character as well, you want to definitely get a complete Relic of Asgard. If you want to get more deflect, you want to get obviously Atlantis. If you want to take less damage, you want to get Relic of Subterranea or a complete Relic of Subterranea. If you want more resource, then, which by the way is a really good one just in general for a lot of characters, so don't think it's like a trash relic. Relic of Gibrim gives you a good amount of resource, and you want to get that if you want to focus on more. Relic of Wakanda is good for like characters like Spider-Man or whoever, like Black Widow. And Relic of Xander is what you want to get for your ranged characters. And yeah, that's basically all there is to really know about what stats to go for. Just to recap, so the defensive stats, the most important defensive stats would be your average effective health and damage reduction, so your defense rating. Oh, and also, when you look at your gear, you can see on the top, it says damage reduction, damage reduction, damage reduction, damage reduction. So that's where you would look at for those. And then for your offensive stats, the most important ones to go for is critical hit, critical damage, brutal strike, and brutal damage. Unless you are relying on your brutal strike, 100% brutal strike, then crit damage and brutal damage and base damage. But for every other character, crit hit, brutal strike, crit damage, brutal damage, and base damage, and then go for attack speed after all that is good, said and done. And yeah, that's basically all. If this video helped you out, if it was like pretty informative, let me know. Go ahead and leave a like, comment, and or whatever, you know, it doesn't really matter. Wish you guys luck with your grind, and yeah, this is All Day Any Day 1 on a PS4, and peace.